Welcome to Story Medicine. I'm Joe Summerfield. For over 20 years, I've been working to better understand and support people in navigating this human experience. And I've come to believe that stories are encoded with the collective wisdom of all who have come before us, that they bring us into connection with the collective unconscious and contain treasure waiting to be decoded. This podcast explores traditional tales through that lens. Each episode offers a story told in full, an exploration of the medicine it may be offering us, and 3 practices to help you to integrate that medicine. Today's story comes from Chinese folk tradition, rooted in a relationship between dragons and the rivers of China that stretches back at least 3,000 years. It explains the origin of China's 4 great rivers, and it carries medicine about what happens when the structures we depend on fail us, about the courage to act without permission, and about natural forces that flow in the world. This story is called The 4 Dragons. Let's begin. Part 1. The Story. Long before the great rivers of China wound their way across the land, there was only the Eastern Sea. It stretched wide and deep and endlessly blue, and in it lived 4 dragons. You may be imagining the winged, fire-breathing creatures of Western stories, but a Chinese dragon is something else entirely. A Chinese dragon has the antlers of a stag, the scales of a carp, the paws of a tiger, the claws of an eagle, and a long, broad snout with pronounced jaw and flaring nostrils. Beneath its chin it carries a luminous pearl, the pearl of wisdom, the concentrated light of awareness. And its body is long like a serpent and swims through the air, winding as it goes. The Chinese dragon governs rain and rivers and the movement of water through the land. So it's associated with blessing, with the force that makes the land fertile and the people fed. These creatures are very different to the monsters that we may expect dragons to be. In the Eastern Sea dwelt the long dragon, the dragon in his fullest form. The yellow dragon, whose colour in Chinese tradition belongs to the earth and to imperial authority at its best. The black dragon, whose colour belongs to the deep places where storms begin. And of course the pearl dragon, the smallest of the 4, whose name carries the quality of luminous awareness that the pearl has always symbolized in this tradition. These 4 dragons were powerful and ancient. They had lived in that sea since before the mountains had names, and they loved to move, winding through the river and leaping up into the sky to curl through the clouds. One afternoon, playing high in the air, the pearl dragon looked down. "Come and see," she called. "Come quickly." The others came to Pearl Dragon's side and with her looked down at the earth below. What they saw was a hillside, and on it a great many people had gathered. They had brought offerings, fruits, small cakes, and sticks of incense that sent pale smoke up into the still air. They were praying. An old woman knelt at the edge of the gathering. On her back she carried a small child who was far too thin. Her voice carried up through the heat. "God of heaven, please, send us rain. Let our children eat." The land below, as far as the eye could see, was cracked. The crops were yellow and withered. There had been no rain for a very long time. "They'll die," said the yellow dragon quietly, "if it doesn't rain soon." The long dragon was still for a moment, and then, "We should go to the one who governs the heavens. He can send rain." So they went. The Jade Emperor sat in his celestial palace, surrounded by the singing of court musicians and the soft light of 10,000 lanterns. He was not pleased to see the 4 dragons arrive without ceremony. "What are you doing here? You should be in your sea." The long dragon bowed. "Your Majesty, the people on earth are suffering. The crops are failing. They have not had rain in so long that they are eating bark from the trees. We beg you, please send them rain." The Jade Emperor glanced towards his musicians and then back at the dragons. "Yes, very well. Go back. I'll send rain tomorrow." The 4 dragons bowed and returned to the sea. Tomorrow came, and no rain fell. The next day, no rain. 10 days passed. The sky remained cloudless and indifferent. Below, the people grew weaker. Some ate grass roots, and when the roots were gone, some ate white clay. The 4 dragons watched from the sea. "He's forgotten," said the Pearl Dragon, "or he doesn't care." "He was listening to music," said the Black Dragon. "He wasn't thinking about the people at all." They sat with this for a long time. Then the Long Dragon looked out at the sea, vast, restless, and full of more water than the earth could ever need, and an idea dawned on him. "Look what we have," he said quietly. "Look how much water is here. If we were to take it up into the sky in our mouths and spray it out above the land, it would fall like rain. It would save them." The dragons looked at the sea and then at one another. "We have no permission for this," said the Black Dragon. "We will be acting on our own authority, and there will be a reckoning." A long silence. Then the Yellow Dragon raised her great golden head. "Yes, there will be." She was quiet for a moment. "But I will do whatever it takes to save them, whatever follows." "Whatever follows," said the Pearl Dragon. "Whatever follows," said the Black Dragon. The Long Dragon nodded. "Then let's begin. We will not regret this." The 4 dragons plunged into the eastern sea, opened their vast mouths, and filled themselves with water. They rose into the sky, higher and higher, until they swooped above the parched land, and then they began to spray. Back and forth they flew, again and again, until the sky grew dark with clouds. Eventually, the first drops of rain fell on the cracked earth. The crops raised their heads. The wheat stalks straightened. The people looked up and felt the droplets on their faces. "It's raining," the old woman said. She was on the hillside, her thin grandchild on her back. "It's raining!" But the god of the sea had noticed his missing water, and he went to the Jade Emperor. The Emperor was furious. He summoned his generals and his armies, and the 4 dragons were seized before they could return to the water, and they were brought before the court. "You acted without my command," said the Jade Emperor. "You took what was not yours to give." The Long Dragon met his gaze and said nothing. There was nothing to defend. They had done it in full knowledge of the consequences, and they would do it again. The sentence was delivered. The mountain god was summoned, and 4 great mountains came crashing down from the sky, one on top of each dragon, sealing them beneath the rock and the earth. Each dragon was imprisoned for eternity. And there, under the weight of the mountains, the 4 dragons made their final choice. They had been sentenced to spend an eternity trapped, waiting for a release that would never come, and instead they turned themselves into rivers. The Long Dragon became the Long River, flowing south through the heart of the land. The Yellow Dragon became the Yellow River, curving through the central plains. The Black Dragon became the Black Dragon River, running north, and the Pearl Dragon became the Pearl River, flowing south toward the sea. From the mountains to the coast, from west to east and north to south, the 4 rivers spread across the land: the Changjiang, the Huanghe, the Heilongjiang, and the Zhujiang. And the people who had been dying watered themselves, they watered their crops, and they thrived. The dragons were never freed. To this day they remain in those rivers, and they never regretted what they did. And so the rivers of China came to be. Part 2. The Medicine. Let's explore the medicine that this story may be offering. Before we start, if you know somebody who might appreciate this story's medicine right now, please share this episode with them. And if you're enjoying the podcast and would like to help others to find it too, please subscribe and leave a review. Thank you. The story opens with the 4 dragons living in the Eastern Sea. They've been there since before the mountains had names. In Chinese tradition, the dragon, the lung, is much more than an animal. They are ancient, elemental, and powerful, a part of the fabric of the world, a governing force of nature, associated with water and weather and with the threshold between heaven and earth. So the 4 dragons in this story represent forces that predate the organizing structures which give rise to the institutions of power. The Jade Emperor and his court exist within the story's world, but these dragons existed before any of that, so they are not subject to that world's authority in any deep sense. I read this as pointing to the idea that there are forces or spirits in nature that exist outside of our organizing structures. And as we come to see in this story, these forces or these spirits have a kind of correcting capacity. And I think that this is a truth clearly borne out in the world around us. But it's also worth acknowledging that these forces or spirits exist within us also. The pearl dragon looks down and she sees the land parched and the people suffering. The dragons agree that it would be right to help, and they do, in the first instance, try to follow the proper path. They ask humbly and formally through the established channel. And the Jade Emperor gives his word, but then he turns back to his musicians and he forgets the dragons entirely. And 10 days pass and the people eat white clay. What the story may be pointing to here is the experience of discovering that an authority you trusted is oriented towards something other than the welfare of those it governs. In this case, the Jade Emperor isn't dramatically villainous. It's not that he refuses the dragons or argues against their petition. He simply has no interest in their cause. Their care is an interruption to his afternoon, as far as he's concerned. Carl Jung wrote about what he called the senex. Derived from Latin for old man, this archetype represents order, discipline, and wisdom. The senex is essentially the structural backbone of the psyche. It offers grounding and structure and continuity and the accumulated wisdom of long experience. But the shadow of the senex can manifest as rigidity and cynicism and tyranny. In the case of the Jade Emperor in this story, it seems that his enthroned comfort has lost its connection to those it was meant to serve. Power that has come to mistake its own preservation for purpose. Authority that remembers its privileges well, but has forgotten its obligations. I think we can all see very clearly how this pattern expresses through structures in our own society. It's not that the structures themselves are necessarily problematic, but they, along with their problems, are a natural part of the ecology of structure, which in turn is a natural part of the ecology of life. But as without, so within. These aren't just principles of the organizing of life around us, but they are also principles of the organizing of life within us. So perhaps the story asks us to look around us and also within. We might ask ourselves, where in me has the senex gone cold or calcified? Or, where have I become the authority that has forgotten its own purpose? In my relationships, in my work, in my relationship with myself? This raises the question, what can I do about this? And the story shows us clearly. The senex is intrinsically linked to its opposite, the pure eternus, or the eternal child. This represents limitless potential, creativity, vision, and playfulness. The shadow of the pure eternus manifests as fear of commitment, unreliability, and an inability to manifest ideas into the real world. So the Senex and the pure Eternus are two halves of the same whole. They are balancing forces. Given the dynamic illustrated in the story, perhaps it's inviting us to consider, where in my life is this corrective pure Eternus energy needed but being suppressed or ignored? Where is the vision, the creativity, the willingness to act from love, being held back? Here in the story, the dragons with their play in the sea and the sky, and their vision to see what's going on in the world below, and their creativity to solve the problems, seem to express the pure Eternus archetype. So they appealed to the order, and after 10 days conceded that the order had failed. And they knew that they would be the correcting force. The long dragon looks out at the sea, and through the pure Eternus quality of vision and creativity, he sees that it contains exactly what the people need, in quantities beyond imagining. And there is nothing stopping them from using it, except for the absence of the command to do so. This is medicine worth sitting with in our own lives. How often do we find ourselves waiting for the authorization, either literal or symbolic, that will not come, or for permission to use what we already have? The black dragon names the cost. They have no permission to carry out the remedy, and there will be a reckoning, and each dragon decides to proceed with the plan anyway. Each dragon, in turn, is weighing not only the consequences of acting, but also the consequences of not acting. And they all agree that they can bear the first set of consequences more easily than the second. What happens to the child on the hillside if the dragons stay in the sea? What does it mean to choose the consequences of not acting simply because those consequences fall on someone else? There are always consequences to action, as well as inaction, and we are well practiced at calculating the costs of action, the perceived risk, the exposure, what we might stand to lose. But we are far less practiced at calculating with equal gravity the costs of inaction. Many of us bear these costs without having identified them at all as part of our decision-making. So the dragons make that calculation and they conclude whatever follows. They feel it's their duty to act, whatever the consequence. So they deliver the water to the people, and the order, turned tyrannical, the Jade Emperor, punishes them by trapping them underneath mountains. The last act of the dragons is deeply creative. They give themselves to a permanent remedy for the Jade Emperor's blind spot. They become the rivers that run through China. The gift that was given once in an afternoon becomes a gift that flows without ceasing. The force that had acted from love, as an urgent remedy, has now become a permanent condition of the land. In the symbolic language of many traditions, and Chinese tradition in particular, water is much more than a substance that sustains life. It is an element associated with the origin and the activation of life. The sea is the source, the primordial condition, the medium in which potential is held before it's actualized. So to the people who faced a ruling order that had forgotten its duty, they gave the facility to actualize their own potential. And what a gift to give. So perhaps the story invites us to consider, where can we provide water to those around us? And where within us is there drought? Where have we let something wither, a relationship, a creative impulse, an unlived part of ourselves, for lack of nourishment? And what would it mean to pour water on those parts? To create the conditions in which what is already seeded might finally activate. There is a concept that's documented back to Plato, but has likely existed across cultures and throughout time, that some refer to as the anima mundi, the soul of the world. This is the idea that the world has an animating intelligence, an intrinsic animating spirit or a consciousness that connects all living beings. That the universe is in some sense a single living intelligent organism, of which we are a part. As we've seen, the Senex and the Pur Eternus are patterns that exist in relationship to one another as part of a dynamic ecology within and outside of us. The anima mundi is what underlies both, the world's own orientation towards life, which moves through whatever vessel is available when it needs to express itself. The dragons in this story didn't originate their compassion. In some sense, they were animated by it. And though the Jade Emperor imprisoned the dragons, he couldn't imprison what was moving through them. Pushed all the way down into the earth, the caring force simply found a new form that would flow without ceasing long after the Emperor's court had been forgotten. So the story perhaps doesn't promise that the ruling order, within or without, will reform. It says perhaps that there is a force that orients everything in the world toward life. That spirit predates and will outlast structures, and it runs through each of us also. That, perhaps, is the deepest medicine that this story carries. There is an ancient elemental spirit that runs through the world, and the world doesn't forget what the world needs. Part 3. Integration Practices. The medicine for us doesn't come from understanding these patterns intellectually. In order for insight to create change in our lives, we need to invite it into our body and into our lived experience. Here are 3 practices to help you to integrate some of this story's medicine. First practice, the audit of inaction. The story asks us to weigh the consequences of not acting with the same level of awareness that we bring to calculating the risks of action. Think of something in your life where you've been waiting for permission, for the right moment, or for someone else. It might be something small, or it might be something significant, something in a relationship, in your work, or in your own inner life. Take 20 minutes with your journal. Explore, perhaps using a mind map, what the consequences of continued inaction or indecision actually are. Who's affected? What won't happen? What's withering? What will be true in a year or 5 years if you didn't act? Notice how the decision looks with this taken into account, as well as the consequences of action, and see if your feeling about the action or decision has changed. Second practice. Where is the drought? The story gives us the image of parched land, cracked earth, withered crops, seeds that cannot germinate without water. Sit quietly for 10 minutes with this visual and ask yourself, where within me is there drought? Where have I let something go unwatered? A relationship, a creative impulse, an unlived or unexpressed part of myself, for so long that it's begun to wither. Listen carefully to the voice that replies. And then ask, what would it mean to bring water there? What is the smallest act of nourishment that I can offer this week? And how can I create the conditions in which what is already seeded might activate? The deliverable here is not a plan. It's a single concrete act of watering, something that you can do before this week is out and perhaps invite into your habits. Third practice, the vessel. The anima mundi, the world's own caring intelligence, is a spirit that moved through the dragons. In some sense, they were possessed by it. Most of us have had at least one moment when something has moved through us that felt larger than our usual thinking self. When we acted from a clarity that came before we had reasoned it, or spoke an honest word when everything around us was organized around silence. Sit with a friend in a listening exchange, or spend 15 minutes writing about such a moment in your life. When were you, however briefly, a vessel for something that felt larger than you? When did this spirit move through you? What did it feel like in your body? What did it make possible? And is there anything in you that resists that spirit? This practice is about recognizing that you already have access to this spirit, and that recognition is itself a kind of opening. The rivers still flow through the land, the permanent expression of a force that no structure could contain. As without, so within. The same ecology of order and correcting spirit that plays out in the world around us, plays out in the world inside us. And the same rivers are available there too, waiting to flow. The medicine doesn't come from understanding these patterns intellectually. It comes from the practices, from the honest accounting, from the act of watering, from the willingness to remember that we have been vessels before, and we can be again. The wisdom in these old stories waits patiently. I hope that this one's medicine found you where you needed it. Thank you for listening to Story Medicine. I'm Joe Summerfield. Until next time.